Another standard we need to look at is obscenity in women. Feminist scholars assert that sexually explicit content subordinates women to men, and otherwise it objectifies them. It exploits women as sex objects for men's pleasures, and that can possibly lead to violence. Because if men consistently view women as just an object for their desires, if the man is violent, then the woman is an object for his violence. So there's been an ongoing debate since the 1970s on how women are viewed in films, how films are made from either a male or a female point of view, the amount of objectification that happens to women, the violence that is perpetrated on women, and when we start discussing this, students often ask, well, how are women objectified, etc. Think of the James Bond films, especially James Bond films of the 70s and 80s. The Bond girls were there not really to be an important counterpoint to James Bond and to help him truly solve the crime. They're there to be an attractive person for his pleasure, and often end up being either aligned with the bad guy or have some terrible thing befall them. And to really underscore the point, most of them had very, I would say, inappropriate names over the years. Pussy Galore is one that comes to mind. So there is a lot of objectification that happens in the James Bond films. I tell you that several communities have attempted to adopt laws regulating indecent material based on the argument that they were harmful to women. So there's certain communities, often around universities with large feminist centers, which say that we don't want certain films here because they're so biased against women. Courts have found these ordinances unconstitutional because, very similar to the pornography on the internet, you do have people who are old enough and who can make the decision to see the film if they want, and because we have a particular group who does not want to see that, we can't abrogate the rights of everyone just for this one particular group. So courts are not usually happy to grant injunctions to stop films from being shown in a particular place just because a particular group will not like them. If that were to be the case, we can also see how the floodgates would open, because you could then have in Jacksonville, you could have religious groups saying we don't want a gay film shown here. You could have the gay group saying we don't want a religious film shown here. You could have the Muslims saying we don't want this Christian film shown here. We could have the Jews saying we don't want this Christian or Muslim film shown here. So you could start to get so many people saying I don't, or we as a large enough group don't agree with this, we don't want it here, that it would just become chaos. And that's not the role of the court, to be, the keeper of society from devolving into chaos. That's what the lawmakers are for. And so we need to have laws that open up, restrict, or leave restrictions in place that are appropriate, but open it up otherwise, and have fair and equity with each different group, so that as films come in, those who don't wish to see them, they don't go see them. That's kind of the simple, basic idea underlining this. For censorship issues, how are we going to control it? Postal censorship, I tell you, no government has been more diligent in policing obscenity in the U.S. than the Postal Service. Most um, material that is obscene at some point goes through the post office. And so the post office is very diligent about keeping addresses of, let's say, known porn producers. It knows which cities, states do not allow porn to be delivered to them. And so the post office has always been um, a large part of making sure that indecent, obscene material is not distributed. Starting with 1873 Comstock Act, provided the basic authority for the U.S. Postal Service to regulate the flow of erotic material in the mail. So as soon as mail started becoming the way that we really got goods from one place to another, Congress and then courts backed up the right of the post office to be the arbiter to say this can't go from A to B. Now with the internet, who knows? Today, I tell you that postal patrons may request to block delivery or solicitations of adult material if they so choose. For example, now it's legal to receive pornography in Jacksonville. Up until about 10 or so years ago, you could not have it shipped in from out of state. So now you can request to have it blocked from coming to you, although with the proliferation of the internet, now most information is sent out via internet because there's much less regulation than through the post office. Film censorship, and this is where we're going to spend the last little bit of time together. Motion pictures were not granted First Amendment protection until 1957. So we start thinking about that. Films really started coming out in the early 1900s. So for about the first 50 or so years that they were in production, they did not have First Amendment rights. Historically, there was significant censorship of the motion pictures by the local community censorship boards. So when a film was released from Hollywood and it went to Birmingham, Alabama had a group that would decide whether the film could come there or not. Jacksonville would have a group to decide whether the film was appropriate for us or not. So every community that had a movie theater, that theater made the decision whether it was an appropriate film to show. There's also a commercial consideration that's gone in, because if a film decided to show a particular, if a motion picture decided, if a cinema decided to show a particular motion picture, knowing that not many people are going to show up for it, then they were just going to lose money on it, and it's not worth it. So they would try to pick films that would turn a profit. Currently, I tell you that local censorship is infrequent, as adult theaters have almost disappeared. In other words, for a long time in the 70s, 80s, 90s, there were adult stores, adult movie theaters, and so we didn't really have a need for a lot of censorship, because if you wanted to see an adult film, you would go to the adult film store. As the adult film stores are disappearing because of the proliferation of the internet, again, we don't see a lot of local censorship anymore of films. And there are a couple of reasons for this that we're going to be going through in the next two lectures on the Hays Code and where we are. So we need to jump ourselves back into the 1920s, 30s, and 40s to start looking at some ideas of film censorship.